Alright, today we are going to be doing a video I've wanted to do for quite some time now, and that is doing a deep dive on 20 different Super Shock shadows. I believe that almost all of these are currently available. I tried really hard not to include ones that were limited edition, and I was actually a little bit late to the game when it came to trying these in general. Now, these sparkly shadows are definitely a classic for a reason. At $7 a piece, they are what I would consider to be on the affordable side. They're user-friendly. You can just apply them with your finger. They have a fun cream to powder finish, and they come in more colorful shades and everyday wearable shades. And something I want to mention really quick is that you can revive dried up Super Shock shadows by adding a few drops of Duraline directly into the shadow, mixing it in and letting it sit overnight. All right, let's go ahead and get into swatching and trying on 20 different shades. Okay, starting off with a classic, we have Rooftop Cocktails. This is a perfect quintessential green brown duochrome eyeshadow. And if you are curious, I made a whole video on green brown duochrome eyeshadows. This shade is quite soft and ethereal. As you can see, it's not the sparkliest, but it does have a beautiful soft sheen. In this look, I layered it over a brown liquid shadow and I loved the results. Because the shadow itself has a bit of a brown base, I actually liked using it as a highlighting shade as well, and even on the face. Alright, the next shade we have is a blue-brown duochrome, and this is Bobaholic. This is actually a relatively new shade. The only thing I have to mention about this shade is that it's currently only available in a trio. That trio is called Milk Tea and Boba. It's actually a really beautiful neutrals with a twist set that came out around the holidays. And I do have a whole video on those trios, so I will link it in the cards. I would say this shade reminds me a lot of Rooftop Cocktails in how soft it is. It has some sparkle, but it's not really intense sparkle, and it's quite glowy. And again, this is a shade that I also really enjoy using as a highlighter. Alright, next shade we have is called Dream Much. You already know I love this shade because it's a light ethereal blue eyeshadow. Dreamy blues are my favorite. They probably always will be. Now, I would say that this shade is more sparkly than the previous two that I just swatched. There is some variation in the level of sparkle between the Super Shock shadows. This shade also happens to be quite glowy. I would also say that this one has a bit more opacity, so you get more pigment on the first swipe. I don't think it makes it better, it's just different and something to keep in mind when you are considering all the different shades. It has silver, blue, and purple sparkle. Okay, next we have the shade Rose Garden, and this is a bit like Dream Much, but I would say that it has more purple to it, so it's kind of like a blue purple. It also does have a fair bit of sparkle, though I would say it's not quite as sparkly as the Dream Much shade that I just swatched. It's definitely a pretty shade, and if you are looking for something that's a bit more lavender, then I think this may be a good option. It still looks very glowy on the skin as well. It's got silver, light blue, and blue-purple sparkle. Okay, the next shade we have is Ice Dream, and you probably can guess that I love this shade because it's an iridescent blue. I have to say that the first time I swatched this shade, I was genuinely really pleasantly surprised. I'm not sure exactly what I expected, but it had more sparkle, it had more glow, and it just looked so beautiful on application. It makes me really wish that there were more Colourpop Super Shock shadows that were iridescent duochromes because I really do think they do them well. And this shade has blue, purple, and silver sparkle. Okay, the next shade we have is called Moonwalk, and I already know that this shade is a favorite for a lot of people because when I did a video on green-brown duochromes, a lot of people told me that they included Moonwalk in this category, and I can definitely see why. It's a really beautiful shade. It's described as having a terracotta base and a golden olive duochrome shift. And on me, I definitely feel like this shade really pops. I do have an olive undertone, so that's probably part of the reason. And I would say with this shade, you definitely do get a good amount of sparkle, but it's still very glowy. Okay, the next shade we have is from one of the other trios that came out around the holiday. There's a total of 3 of them. This is the shade Thanks So Mochi, and it was in the matcha and mochi set, and I'm including it because, again, this shade really impressed me. It's another example of Colourpop doing an iridescent duochrome really well. This shade is a warm-toned iridescent that has gold and some orange and a hint of red. It's absolutely lovely, and all of the shades in this trio are similarly warm-toned, I want to say. All right, now we have an older shade. This is called Frog, and I believe this one's been around for quite a while because I remember hearing that a YouTuber I used to watch quite some time ago say that this was one of their favorite shades. Now, when I swatched this shade, I was definitely really blown away because this one is very sparkly. This is a standout shade. It's probably one of the sparkliest super shock shadows that I've tried. It's described as an icy baby pink, and on application and in the swatch, you can really see how standout the sparkle is in this one. The shade has a multicolored sparkle, which gives it a little bit extra dimension, and I can definitely see why this one is a favorite for so many people. Okay, the next shade I have is called Party of 5, and I want to say that this is also a favorite for a lot of people, or so I think. This one definitely gives me some 90s nostalgia because I don't know if you remember that show called Party of 5 from around that time, or maybe that was more Y2K, but this is a beautiful neutral shade. It's described as a warm burgundy. Although, I don't know, to me, this is a little bit lighter than a burgundy. I might have called this one like kind of a cooler toned rose gold. The shade has a good amount of opacity and a cool toned reflect throughout. Okay, the next shade I have is called the Griffith, and I was really excited about this shade because this definitely looks to me like the type of shade I am drawn to when it comes to a day-to-day one-and-done shadow. This one definitely isn't the sparkliest, but you can see even on first swatch that it's very opaque and very metallic. The shade itself is described as a silver lavender, which I would say is a pretty good description. But I don't know, to me, it also has a kind of subtle hint of taupe. Really beautiful shade, and another one that people have told me is a favorite of theirs. Okay, the next couple of shades that I have are from the Twilight New Moon collection that came out a couple of years ago, I want to say. As far as I can tell, these are a permanent part of the lineup. This is the shade We Won't Bite, and the price of the shades in this collection are a little bit more expensive. I think these retail for $9 instead of $7. I can't speak to exactly why that would be. Maybe it's because it's a part of the Twilight collection. This is a really cool shade. I would describe it as a deep golden bronze. This is definitely a very grungy shade, definitely matches the vibes of the New Moon collection. It's smooth, very metallic, very opaque. I wouldn't say that it's the sparkliest of shades, but definitely a really cool shade. The other Twilight New Moon Super Shock shadow is called the Volturi, and this, I believe, is currently out of stock. I would imagine that they would restock this one. I can definitely understand why this one is out of stock because it is a super unique shade. First of all, we know that red shimmers are hard to come by, and this is like a blackened red. Really not a sparkly shade. In fact, I would say it has almost more of a satin appearance, both when you swatch it and on the lid. Very unique in terms of the shade itself for sure. Okay, the next shade we have is called Montecito, and this shade is really cool because this is what I would describe to be a yellow shimmer shadow. As an eyeshadow color, I would say this is definitely not the type of shade I tend to go for a lot of the time, but I gotta say, this is a great yellow shade. Yellow shimmer shadows are also something that I would consider to be harder to come by. I'm not exactly sure why. The only thing is that I feel like people might say that this shade has a bit more gold than they're going for if they're going for something that's super yellow. I would say the texture and finish of this one is that it's metallic but still very sparkly. All right, next we have another classic, and I think this may be the very first Super Shock shadow that I ever tried from Colourpop. This is the shade Ritz, and the reason why I picked this up a few years ago is because I had heard over and over that this is a dupe for Urban Decay's Space Cowboy. And I would agree with that after comparing them. Now, mine is texture-wise a little bit on the drier side, but now that I know about this Duraline hack, I'm definitely going to try that. I gotta say that even for a shade that's kind of drier, it still performs well. It just might be texture-wise a little bit more fun to use if it had the Duraline. I would say that the opacity of this shade is higher than Space Cowboy. Space Cowboy has more of a scattered sparkle effect to it. Okay, the next shade we have is called Green Juice, and to me this looks like basically a kind of mucky, grungy green. It's described as simply a chartreuse. This is a really beautiful high impact shimmer. It has a very metallic finish, very pigmented and opaque even on the first swipe. It has the shine of a metallic and still a good amount of sparkle. I feel like because of my olive undertones, this shade definitely suits me and my skin tone, my undertones well. Next shade we have is called Tassel, and this is an incredibly icy shade. This doesn't have any shift to it, just has that silvery white metallic finish. As you can see, both in my swatch and in application on the lid, it has a good amount of opacity, and I would say that it's quite sparkly. I'm sure that some people wonder if you could use a shade like this as kind of a sheer diamond sparkle topper, but I don't think that this is that type of shade at all, and I'm not sure the texture of the Super Shock shadows lend themselves to being that type of shade. But I could definitely see this shade as being a favorite and considered to be a classic. All right, the next shade we have is called Abbott Kinney, and this is simply described as a deep bronze, which I think is really a perfect description for it. This shade I would describe as having a metallic finish. I would say it's not super sparkly. For me personally, the finish of this shade is not my favorite. I feel like when I wear metallic tones, I am really looking for something that's shinier. But if you are going for something that's more subtle, this could be a good option, especially if you have a medium to deeper skin tone and you're looking for a very day-to-day neutral shade. Next shade we have is Tankini, and this is described as a vivid yellow. So if you liked Montecito, but you were hoping for something that was more of a true yellow, I think this is a great option. I feel like I do have people ask me about yellow shimmers, and honestly, there's not a lot of options out there for them, so it's nice that they have a kind of more true yellow. I would describe the finish on this to be metallic, and there is a silver, yellow, and golden sparkle throughout. Next shade we have is called Aster, and this is described simply as a peachy taupe. I would agree with that. I do think there is also like a very slight hint of bronze in here. With this shade, you have quite a metallic finish. You also have a decent amount of sparkle with this shade. This is one that I think a lot of people would consider to be a good kind of day-to-day one and done neutral shade. All right, last but not least, we have the shade Sweet Tea, and this is described as a warm baby pink. I do think you get a hint of warm peachy coral with this one. This shade isn't super sparkly. I would say if anything, you have maybe a subtle hint of sparkle. You definitely get more of a sheen with it. So in terms of its sparkle level, it's completely different from a shade like Frog, but it's a pretty shade. And if you are looking for something that's a little bit more on the subtle side and that doesn't have so much sparkle, then I think this is a good option. All right, and here is what the first 10 shades that I swatched and tried on look like swatched my arm, and then the second set of shades that we swatched and tried on. I'm definitely really happy that I've had the chance to play around with Super Shock shadows more over the past several months, especially. I just feel like this is such a unique formula, and I love the fact that it seems like a lot of these shades are part of the permanent lineup and that they're continuing to slowly add new shades to the range over time. I only just wish that the trios they came out with recently were available individually. However, the trios are nice, and if you like each of the shades that are in each trio, then I think it's definitely worth it. What I would love to hear in the comments is if you could make any Super Shock shadow, what shade would you pick? And what is your favorite Super Shock shadow in general? Also, let me know if you want to see a part 2 on Super Shock shadows in the future. As always, I really hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.